Good evening. I want to open with a little poem by David White. Could I get you to close your eyes for just a few seconds? Yes, both of them. In that first hardly noticed moment in which you wake, coming back to this life from the other more secret, movable, and frighteningly honest world where everything began. There is a small opening into the new day, which closes the moment you begin your plans. What you can plan is too small for you to live. What you can live wholeheartedly will make plans enough for the vitality hidden in your sleep. So much of the vitality that we discover in our sleep actually is derived from our dreams. And we're going to take a kind of a broad skip across perspectives on dreams and dreaming tonight. We've had some wonderful presentations over the last few days looking at dreams from a variety of perspectives. And I want to add into that the contemporary scientific grounding around dreams. Om. We have a little signaling system here. When I say Om, Ishwara changes the slide. But sometimes when I say he might get confused. So. Actually, some of the slides will require a couple of pushes. So I want to start with the point that we really misconstrue dreaming in our world. This is true both for sleep and dreams. We are in what I will call a pre-Copernican era in consciousness, and we tend to look at dreams as a servant or being subservient to waking life. So we look at dreams classically from sort of a psychological perspective as being wish fulfillment. Dreams are wish fulfillment about waking life wishes. We look at dreams as being a rebound of suppressed emotional material from waking life. We look at dreams in terms of neural housekeeping. It's like what goes on in the brain at night kicks up these dust clouds, and we project images, images onto them. And very commonly, we look at dreams as being sort of coded signs and symbols, and if we're bright enough and smart enough to decode them, we can come up with a secret message. It's like God is standing in the corner mumbling, and we have to figure it out. Mostly we tend to look at dreams as being non-essential. It's a very common notion that it's just a dream. We dismiss it. Psst. One more time. And okay, good. So I want to make a few comments about fish. I sort of came of age in the 60s, and there was an era in which we were communicating with animals. I don't know if any of you have ever had a chance to actually talk with fish. Someone in the back, yeah. But it turns out that fish do not believe in water. Did you know that? They don't believe in water. You can be sitting there with a fish and say, this thing, you swim in it, you breathe in it, you live in it, you sleep in it, it's all around you, and the fish is going to go, right. Because they habituate to it. Now, there are fish stories, there's fish lore about these little critters getting abducted by aliens. So on occasion, a fish will be swimming along, see a morsel of food, chomp down on it, and suddenly has this profound experience of being lifted up out of the water. And it comes up out of the water and it goes, oh my God, it's unwater. It's unwater. Not until the fish really gets not water can it get water, right? And the fish comes back and has this horrific tale about being abducted by aliens, having something in its mouth, and it comes back with 2 scars, and it's been examined and thrown back. So nobody believes in unwater. But there are those among us who actually have had this experience where we move into a profound experience of the unconscious, and we get that there's so much more going on here than we're accustomed to. We are in a pre-Copernican era with regard to consciousness. You remember Copernicus stood up one day and suggested maybe planet Earth was not the center of the universe. We live in a world where most of us have come to believe that waking consciousness, what we're doing now, what many of us are doing now, that waking consciousness is actually, it's where it's at. It's the key. It's the premium. It's the prime consciousness. And therefore, sleep and dreams are secondary, subservient to. And our posture toward dreaming, mostly our posture toward dreaming is about juicing it, using the dream to make us better waking people. That's our posture toward sleep as well. So I'm going to share with you tonight what I call a 3D, a three-dimensional view of dreaming. And it's an attempt to bring together the science behind REM sleep, the psychology, broad psychology around studying of the dream itself, and then a broader notion of dreaming, which is a kind of consciousness we often associate with shamanic traditions and other spiritual perspectives of broadened consciousness. What my hope is to leave you today with a sense of what I call the continuity of consciousness, something I'm writing about called the United States of Consciousness, because we unconsciously, unknowingly live in a world where we are segregating waking and sleeping and dreaming, and that segregation has some profoundly negative effects on our awareness and our health and our lives. So, Ron Lang wrote a beautiful poem. Ron Lang was a researcher in consciousness, a psychiatrist in the UK. And this poem, I think, is an incredible invitation into the dream. It says the range of what we think and do, the range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there is little we can do to change until we notice how failing to notice shapes our thoughts and deeds. This is a beautiful and humble invitation to come to the edge, to acknowledge that what we see is what we see, but to consider also that maybe there's a larger context, something palpable, rich, numinous, incredibly important, something that does impact our lives that we're not accustomed to seeing. It's an invitation to expand consciousness, and I think that's where the dream shows up, when we begin to consider what sits around the periphery of our ordinary perspective of life. Oh, let me mention it at the bottom of that page, too. I had a reference to a book called The Natural Mind. Andrew Weil, who I've worked with for quite a few years, wrote a book many years ago in the early 70s where he came to the conclusion that it was part of human nature to want to expand consciousness. He had many examples in children who would spin around and intentionally get themselves dizzier, look at the world upside down through their legs. And he points out that in every culture there's a desire to expand consciousness. It may well be that the great epidemics of addiction that we see today are really that desire to expand consciousness gone awry, or people who are unable to do it in other ways. But that the desire itself is part of our nature and part of something a calling that we need to heed. Okay, so this is as technical as I'm going to get. I just want to point out a few things in this. This is a sleep histogram, and you'll notice that there are waves that take us through the night. We go in the vertical axis on the left from awake through REM and then through different stages of sleep. Notice that we get our deep sleep, our deepest sleep in the first part of the night. We get little bits of REM sleep and through the night, and then most of our REM in the latter part of the night. Basically, we do virtually all of our deep sleep in the first part of the night, and most of our REM sleep, most of our night dreaming in the latter third of the night. So if you keep in mind that the most common form of sleeplessness in our world is sleep maintenance insomnia, or called EMA, early morning awakening, most of what we call sleep disorders are actually dream disorders. And I'll make the point that so many of the negative ramifications we associate with sleep loss actually result from dream loss. And this is one of them. Okay. Also notice there's a green arrow there that indicates the production and release of melatonin, which increases through the night. We will talk about melatonin, particularly in its relationship to REM sleep and dreaming in the workshop tomorrow. And notice the red arrow, the red vector, that represents changes in body temperature. And notice as we sleep, our bodies literally dissipate heat. They have to get cooler and cooler. And you'll notice that the point of greatest coolness, the nadir of coolness, toward the right side of the slide, the deepest point in the red arrow, happens to coincide when we are in our deepest REM sleep. So we can make the point literally that sleep is cool and dreaming is the coolest part of sleep. Okay. We heard some wonderful discussion this week about various images out of Greek mythology, and I just wanted to add a little bit to that. Here's a classic painting done in 1878 by Evelyn de Morgan of Hypnos facing forward, Hypnos, the god of sleep. And of course, we need to disconnect the notion of Hypnos from hypnosis. It's a reference to the archetype of sleep. And facing forward is Hypnos, the god of sleep. And he's flying up into the night sky in this image with his mother, Nyx, the goddess of night. Nyx was a mighty, mighty character in the Greek pantheon, and had powers very similar to the powers we attribute to the notion of God today. She lived underground, which was interesting, as opposed to up in the sky. And she rose up at night and folded her cape or wings open over the earth and made everything cool and everything dark. And she often was seen flying with her son, Hypnos, who's a very sweet-natured god. Hypnos is often depicted carrying poppies, which symbolize sleep. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One is it reminds us of a very profound truth about sleep. Hypnos is the child of Nyx. That tells us that sleep is born of night. And night is really the very best sleep and very best dream medicine we can have. You'll notice, too, that Hypnos is drizzling these poppies down to the planet below. And this is reminiscent of a much more recent story. Many of us grew up with the story of the Sandman, where there's a flying being that comes into your room and sprinkles sleepy dust over your eyes and puts you to sleep. So he's sprinkling poppies, he's sprinkling sleep down onto the earth below. So number one, sleep is the child of night. Night is the best sleep medicine. And number two, and this is the hardest one for most of us to get, sleep is grace. Sleep is already given to us. I've come to the conclusion, based on both what I consider scientific and spiritual data, that we are all always already asleep. That sleep is a fundamental state in consciousness. It resides always in the background. We never have to go there to get to sleep. We simply have to release waking. But I bring these characters up for another reason. Nyx is the grandmother of Morpheus, and Hypnos is the father of Morpheus. And Morpheus is the wonderful Greek god, one of the Greek gods of dreams. So I want to take a few minutes with this slide and say a few things about what we've learned about REM sleep, and I think some of the fascinating findings that have really important implications for how we relate to our own dreams. So first of all, REM sleep is not dreaming. R.E.M, you might know, comes from, it's named after a rock group from Athens, Georgia. It also refers to the fact that our eyes move rapidly under our closed lids when we are in REM sleep. REM sleep is not the same as dreaming. And the best way I can describe that is REM sleep is a window that opens at night. It opens and closes at night, and it gets longer and longer through the night. It's a window through which we can most clearly observe the dream. I'll make the point later that we dream all the time. The dream is always there, and we mistake the observation of the dream for the presence of the dream. You know, we assume that when we can see it, it's not there, but it's always there. But we use the term synonymously, and REM sleep does give us, for most of us, gives us the most direct, sharp, clearest picture of the dream. We know from lots of data that REM sleep is really critical for memory formation. And this is not just about remembering the numbers and the different names of things in your life. A memory, as we'll talk about in a moment, is really about who you become. These are layers of experience that get laid down in our being. There's a lot of data showing that REM sleep regulates mood and emotion. People do better when they dream around their emotions. There's been a series of studies done that show that we recover much more effectively, more rapidly from emotional losses when we have REM sleep. And this is independent of awareness of the REM or independent of analysis. There's something really healing about allowing ourselves to dream. How many of you have ever had the experience of waking up and being unable to move? Okay, good. About half of you. It's a very common experience. It's called sleep paralysis. And you may or may not know that when we go into dream sleep, in addition to the closure of sensory channels, right? When we go to sleep, we close our eyes, we stop listening, we can't really feel through our touch, our haptic senses. In addition to that, when we enter REM sleep, in addition to not having sensory input, we can no longer engage in motor output. We become paralyzed when we're in our dreams. Now, all of the essential functions in our body are on automatic pilot. You know, your heart is going and other things essential are going. But our voluntary muscles, the muscles we move with, the muscles we speak with, are totally offline. We are paralyzed in our dreams. But if you step back and think about it, there's nothing going in, right? We're not taking in sensory information from the world, and there's nothing going out. So in a very literal sense, we are disembodied in REM sleep. We're disembodied in our dreams. And this is very consistent with many sacred traditions that suggest that when we dream, the soul leaves the body. From a psychological perspective, we have an opportunity to experience reality, experience things, to experience independently of the body. And I'll talk about why that's important as we go along. So another piece of this is that our voluntary muscles, the ones that are offline when we dream, are very important in modulating the experience of emotion. In fact, the word emotion comes from the root of the word motion, right? The part of the brain, the limbic system that mediates a lot of emotional experience, runs a lot of nerve fibers down to our voluntary muscles. There's information constantly being sent to our muscles about our emotions. When we have a strong emotion, we say we are moved. And a good definition of an emotion is an energy that wants to move us. We might sit and contain it, or we might express it in various ways. But emotional energy runs down into the body. It is grounded in the body. In a sense, when we have emotions, they are shaped and channeled by being in a body. They're influenced by sensory input. They're shaped, framed by the things we see, and shaped and framed by our reactions, our expression of them. Except when we dream. When we dream, we come face to face with experience, with emotion in a very raw way. It's no longer contained. It's no longer framed or channeled through the body. So it gives us an opportunity, in a sense, to learn to be mindful around much deeper, richer, let's say, disembodied experiences. In more recent years, there have been some fascinating findings about what happens in REM sleep at a psychological level. So maybe some of you have heard in the last few years we've had this new model emerging, looking at the gut, looking at the GI tract as a second brain. We've discovered many of the neurochemicals that mediate experiences in the brain occur in the gut. And so when you think about it, our guts, our GI systems, have a certain intelligence. The gut has to make some very critical decisions about what it will keep and what it will sift through and let go. Because everything we consume is screened. It goes through the security system. And in its intelligence, your gut decides what it's going to keep and what it's going to let go. We might then think of the brain in REM sleep as a second gut, because what the brain does during REM sleep, during dreaming, is it sifts through all of the experiences, the emotions, the conversations, everything that's happened in our waking day, in a sense, is digested during the dream. It's broken down into elemental components, and based on lots of previous experience, your system decides what it's going to keep of everything you've been exposed to that day, what it will remember, what it will consolidate into memory, and what it will let go of. So what this tells us is that we are remade in our dreams, that we need to dream to continue to grow, that the dream allows us to take the experience of daily life and add it to who we are. And the ramifications around that is if we don't dream well, we really, in a psychological sense, we stop growing. And this is my greatest concern in my professional world today. We as a world are significantly more dream deprived than we are sleep deprived. And there's so little attention, such little regard offered for this, such little awareness or consciousness around it. So many behaviors and habits and lifestyle procedures today significantly interfere with, suppress REM sleep. Excessive alcohol consumption suppresses REM sleep. We're not talking about a drink here or there, but a lot of people have more than a drink here or there. Hypnotics, which are sleeping pills, especially tricyclic antidepressants, TCAs, benzodiazepines. These are tranquilizing drugs, minor tranquilizers like Ativan, Klonopin, Librium. These drugs significantly suppress REM sleep. The vast majority, in fact, almost all antidepressants ever on the market to varying degrees suppress REM sleep. A category of drugs called anticholinergics, which are being used more and more in an aging population, significantly interfere with REM sleep. Exposure to light at night, which I'll talk about a little more in a moment, suppresses melatonin, which interferes with REM sleep. Obstructive sleep apnea, in addition to interfering with true sleep, makes it nearly impossible for people to dream at night. Middle insomnia, as I mentioned, if you're waking up in the middle of the night or early morning and not sleeping again, you are losing dream time. If you routinely awaken with an alarm clock, which I know none of you do, but some people actually do that. If you awaken with an alarm clock, you're snipping off the end of your dreams. This is like somebody handing you a really good little novel, but saying, oh, wait a minute, and before giving it to you, they tear off the last 10 pages, right? It just takes off the end of the dream. There's a dismissive posture, excuse me, in our world, which I've hinted at already, that we don't really get what dreaming is about. It's considered incidental. And something I'll go into more tomorrow. There are a number of studies that show, cross-cultural studies, meta-analytic studies show that most dreams, most of the emotional content in our dreaming is negative. And it's one of the reasons people back off from their dreams, because they don't know how to have a conversation with what we call shadow. This is what it looks like when we lose our dreams. Can you hear?
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
Help!
I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do. That's it.
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
Okay. Ishwar. Okay. What happens when we lose our dreams is our perception of the world starts to shrink, and we are so much encouraged in our lives today to focus in on the mundane, on really becoming maintenance people. Many people live with the sense that they will let themselves dream in the broad sense once this gets done, once that gets done, right? Once you finish your to-do list. I'm curious, has anyone ever finished their to-do list here? No, it goes on and on. But there's a seductive deception that goes on. There's a quote from Jerry Seinfeld here who says that the human body is just a lot of maintenance. It's a lot of showering, a lot of shaving, a lot of cleaning, a lot of clipping, a lot of checking. If your body was a car, you wouldn't buy it. It's just too much upkeep. But this is true for life. Everything falls apart. And if the focus is on keeping this world together, we end up ignoring the other world. Time data studies show that Americans spend growing amounts of time engaged in maintenance, engaged in mundanity. I started working on a paper years ago called The Time of Your Life, and I was collecting various sets of recommendations from various Americans association of, the American Dental Association says you should brush your teeth for 7 minutes and floss for so many minutes. You add all this up, and I got very discouraged because I very quickly got to a point where I realized there's no time to work. Okay, if you really want to take care of yourself, you're going to have to quit your jobs. Okay? There's a beautiful saying that somebody told me came from the Hindu scriptures. I haven't been able to find it, but it says, meet your needs, do your maintenance, meet your needs with your left foot. Not even your right foot, but your left foot. Certainly keep your hands free to attend to what's most critical in your life. Okay, when we lose REM sleep, when we lose our dreams, there's data both from human and animal studies showing that they bounce back, they rebound. We need to dream, we need to have REM sleep. And it becomes a problem because REM under pressure starts to push its way out of its normal home in the latter part of sleep, and it finds its way disrupting deep sleep. In fact, the most common pattern we see when we intentionally dream deprive humans and animals from dreaming, dream deprive them at night, the pattern that we see is the same exact pattern that we see in clinical depression. In other words, people with depression look like they have lost their dreams. And from a psychoanalytic perspective, it's what we used to say, that depression is in fact the loss of one's dreams. I won't go into this in detail, but many years ago in the 1920s, Carl Jung and his students developed a model suggesting that there was a relationship between dream loss and cancer. And briefly, they pointed out that schizophrenics, paranoid schizophrenics, were wild, expulsive dreamers. We could look at hallucinations and delusions as dreams gone wild, breaking through into waking life. They had remarkably little cancer. We know this even today, despite the fact that a huge percentage of them smoke tobacco. They have surprisingly little cancer. And Jung said the opposite was true in people who tended to divert the dream energy, suppress the dream energy somatically. And the dream energy, which is a natural creative force, if it's channeled only in the body, will start to create at a somatic level, and that would look like cancer. There's a model that's difficult to test. There's some indications today that support this, but it's an interesting notion. And next slide, please. I do want to make the point that when we look closely at depression, we realize that what we call depression is a kind of a psychological fever that is trying to return the dream. Depression, in fact, may be more of an endogenous healing response than something that we have to suppress with medication. Okay, I shared an image of Nix and Hypnos before, and I want to make the point that Nix is in exile. There are tens of thousands of images like this one taken from satellites around the globe, and year after year after year, we are lighting up this planet brighter and brighter and brighter. And it's as if we light the planet up the way we light our homes up. Excessive light at night, it's called LAN, is a critical factor in the suppression of melatonin, and there's growing data suggesting that it's a factor in a whole range of disorders, including sleep disorders, suppressed dreaming, and even certain types of cancer. Al Gore a few years ago said that the planet has a fever, and it's really interesting to look at this. And if we think of the planet as having a sense of life, we are not even letting the planet sleep and dream at night. We keep the lights on all night. So, we live in a world we tend to deify things associated with the word light. Everything light is good, when we talk about angelic light and celestial light and light of God and light beer. And these are good things. And then dark stuff is bad, right? Prince of Darkness, Dark Nights of the Soul. But that will change in time because the word dark is being redeemed by its association with the word chocolate. But exposure to light at night is one of the most critical forms of pollution on this planet, and we are so unconscious about it. Even small amounts of light in one's bedroom will trickle across the closed eyelid and over time significantly suppress the production of melatonin. There have been studies that strongly associate with exposure to light at night with cancer. The World Health Organization not long ago designated shift work, where there's a lot of exposure to light at night, as a probable carcinogen. And we have data for women at least showing that exposure to light at night is strongly correlated with increases in cancer. So let's come to this critical question. I think we all have a vested interest in waking, and many of us never really stop to ask ourselves what it's about. So what is waking? I want to make one brief comment about this. One of the ways of defining waking is that it's a form of consciousness that is informed by intentionality. Waking is really defined by intentionality. When we are awake, whether we're conscious or aware of it or not, we have layers of intention, some of them very simple. I'm fond of asking patients, what is it you want? What is it you really want? And of course, many people will say, I want a sense of spiritual oneness with God. But one time, I asked this to a woman, and she sat for a few seconds and contemplated. And in all seriousness, she said, what I really want is a Krispy Kreme donut. And it's true for all of us. If we look inside, we have layers of intention. What our intentions are, whether we're conscious of them or not, determine our perception. Intentions frame the world we live in. So they define a frame around waking consciousness. Intention determines perception. Intention frames the world we live in. Intention determines perception. Perception is the world we live in. So it's really interesting to be aware of what we want and how that impacts what we see. Then another question, again, please. And one more time. The question is, what is dreaming? What is dreaming? If intention is largely informed by, waking is largely informed by intention, dreaming is informed by reception. Waking is largely yang. It's not all it is, but largely. Dreaming, night consciousness, sleep and dreams is more yin. There's a quality of receptivity about it. When we are intentional about something, it can shrink our perspective. We kind of get these microscopic eyes that sort of focus in on what we deem to be relevant. Intention assigns relevance to our experience. Reception, on the other hand, the kind of consciousness we bring to the dream is broader. It tends to be more open. One more. So when we look at waking and dreaming, it turns out that waking is dreaming. Waking is a kind of dreaming that's sort of framed, it's defined, it's constrained by somatic experience, by sensory experience and motor experience. It's primarily informed by intention. Think about water flowing across a landscape. That water will eventually carve a creek or stream or a river. It will carve banks, and those banks in return will create a framework for the flow of that water. It'll determine where it goes, where it bends, where it goes straight. It'll determine its depth and its velocity at times. So when we're in a body, the fluid of consciousness is shaped by being in a body. Okay? When that stream empties into a sea, it empties into a larger body of water, then waking empties into dreaming. So what is dreaming? Dreaming is waking that is not contained or constrained by somatic, by sensory or motor experience. It's primarily informed by receptivity. It's the same elemental consciousness. If we use the metaphor of water, when it's traversing land, we are awake. It's defined, it's directional, it has intention, if you will. When it opens into this larger body and it unifies with a larger consciousness, with dream consciousness, it's the same element, but in a very, very different context. I like to think of dreaming as a way of seeing. It's a way of perceiving, and I like the notion of macroscope. In contrast to the kind of microscopic analytic eyes most of us use to get by day to day in our world today, this is kind of a wide-angle lens. It's a relaxed view, which naturally occurs in REM sleep, not so naturally in waking life. So just a few points here. I want to run through this quickly. When we dream, most of us believe we're awake. And I'm not talking about lucid dreaming, but in the dream, we have the same sort of sense that we are awake. Dreaming also generally pulls us into a present moment consciousness. It's one of the reasons there's a numinous quality about it. But one of the most interesting things about dreaming is that we suspend judgment. There's a classic dream. Okay, so you're sitting in this wondrous place, and you begin to look around, and you realize you're sitting in a beautiful, beautiful dining room, and it turns out you're floating on this gigantic, wondrous cruise ship. You're on the Queen Mary, and you are engaged in one of the most amazing conversations of your life. You're discussing the nuances of Nietzsche's latter work with a giant green squirrel sitting across from you. You've done this, right? I mean, this is such an amazing conversation. It's just so cool. It's profound, and you're learning things, and it's just amazing. Not until you wake up, not in the dream, not until you wake up and step back in the waking world, do you look back at that dream and you go, my God, that was weird. But it wasn't weird when it was happening, right? When you're awake, you're coming at the dream with all kinds of intentions that shape your consciousness. But in the dream itself, those intentions are relaxed. There's an openness, there's an open-heartedness to experience. And we can begin experiencing things in their depth the way we did when we were children, because we don't bring that analytic, judgmental mind to it. Another thing about the dream is that in contrast to waking life, where things are meaningful pretty much only if they're aligned with some of our intentions, in the dream, things are just meaningful. Because there's less intentionality, most things can appear just to be inherently meaningful. Okay, in addition to the macroscope, I talk about something called a macrosphere. And most of us believe that when we dream, we go down into our own personal psyche. I go into my mind or my brain or my history, and I have my dreams and you have yours. And there is that level of personal psychology that we dip into commonly in our dreams. But there's been a suggestion since time immemorial, and we're beginning to kind of look for some data on this, which is very exciting. There's a suggestion that maybe if we go deep enough into the dream, we will come into a shared dream world. We'll come into a dreamscape. I think it's really interesting to begin to look at the parallel between the shared waking world and the shared dream world. And some of this is a bit uncomfortable. So in our world today, the planet, I think, suffers from this sort of shameless attempt to use resources, to juice the planet without any regard for what is needed, for its impact, for its effect on the rest of the planet. And it's interesting, the most common approaches to dream work today actually do the same thing to the dreamscape. We want to juice the dream for what it can tell us. We want to use it as a resource solely to make ourselves better waking people. And we it's a very limited perspective on the dream, and I think there's a striking parallel between how we view the dreamscape and how we view the landscape of waking life. There's also a problem with pollution. I think industrial pollution, obviously, with the toxins around the chemicals we've dispersed around the planet. But there's an interesting parallel because many of us bring kind of an industrial mentality into the dreamscape at night. We want to use it. Rather than being in a conversation with it, often it's an attempt to dominate it and control it. And I think we are in both landscapes, the waking world and the dream world, in denial of the incredible interdependence and the oneness of those two worlds. I've been working with a company for a couple of years called Shadow, and we have an app that will be released soon. And what we're hoping to do is to gather the largest global database of dreams ever. And it's a searchable database. And if you dream about a green goat one night, you can search and see how many people on planet Earth may have had a similar dream, how many people may have showed up in a very similar place in the dreamscape. Okay, I'm going to go into this more detail tomorrow. I just wanted to say briefly that there are different kinds of dreams. I think we had some referral. There sometimes, this is a Tibetan perspective that I like, that there are ordinary dreams. You might think of these as dreams in which, metaphorically, the experiences of sort of normal daily waking life are sort of whisked up into the atmosphere of the dream world. So we encounter normal experiences, but in a broader, more ethereal context. There are spiritual dreams, which we've had some discussion of, that kind of come down. It's the ethereal coming down into the dream at night. And then in Tibetan Buddhism, there are clear light dreams, which are simply dreams that have no karmic traces left in them. There's clarity, there's openness. Hey, I want to say a few words about what in Jungian perspectives we call the waking dream. And I suggested earlier that we dream all the time. You know, we say we dream at night for the same reason we say stars come out at night. But the stars don't actually come out. They're present all the time. The dream is present all the time. Maybe like stars is difficult to view during the day. It's sort of occluded by the brightness of the day, by the brightness of waking consciousness. But it's interesting to consider that the dream is always there, that the dream is always around us. It's always something we can access. The waking dream in some ways is opposite to the lucid dream. In the lucid dream, we bring waking awareness into the night dream usually. In the waking dream, we bring the dream awareness, dream eyes into the waking day. We can learn from the way we view the dream at night to view waking life in much more of a dreamy way. I'm going to talk tomorrow about a way of journaling waking life as if it was a dream that opens our hearts to that. What I want to emphasize here is something Carl Jung spoke about that never got a whole lot of attention in modern psychology. He talked about the dream being the space between us all. And again, most of us think of the dream as being very personal. I have mine, you have yours, and we're just analyzing it, you know, we're juicing it for personal experience. But this is a notion that suggests that there's another world that we share, not just in this waking world, but there's a deeper, more expansive dream world that we all partake of. Okay. In understanding the waking dream, Jung spoke about what he called the symbolic view of life. When we bring dream eyes to bear on the waking world, we begin to see that symbols go beyond what we ordinarily think of them as. So this is a Chinese character. It's the character for flower. If you read Chinese and you look at that, it would trigger an image of a flower in your mind. In the symbolic view of life, the same thing happens. It doesn't stop when you actually have the image of the flower. The image of the flower is suggestive of flowerness or rosehood or something deeper and deeper. And when you begin to look at things this way, everything is endless. Everything goes on and on and on and on. Everything reverberates. Everything starts to quiver on and on and on and on. And when you look at your waking life with less intention, suddenly things start to appear meaningful. You don't necessarily know what the meaning is. The example here is like during waking life, if you're walking down the street and you come across a feather, it's a feather, you know. And my parents taught me not to touch those. I grew up in Brooklyn, and you know they were covered with joims, and you know it's just a feather. Some pigeon dropped it. You know, if you switch the scene and you're in a dream and you're walking down some path and there's a feather, you know, the next day you're on the phone with your therapist. It's like, hey man, there was a feather in my dream. What does it mean, right? There's a sense of meaning. And really, the distinction there is that we show up in the dream with much less intention. We show up with dream eyes. And what we find is that many, many things begin to appear more meaningful. We don't necessarily know what they are, and we can't necessarily or even need to figure it out, but life starts to look a lot more interesting and meaningful. How many of you have had this experience? I don't mean this literal one. So you're in bed, you're asleep, you're dreaming, you're deep in a dream, you're in a bad dream. There's something really uncomfortable happening. And as the dream continues, you begin to just get a sense that you're in your bed, and suddenly there's a wave of relief that comes over you around this notion that, oh, it's just a dream. You're having a bad dream, you're having a nightmare, but as soon as you recognize that, of course, you have some relief. At that point, you're at a point I call the verge. How many of you have had that experience and then decided to go back into the dream? Yeah, it's very common, isn't it? Because knowing that you're going to wake up, it sort of creates a sense of impunity. You can go back into the dream, right? Because you know it's just a dream. So this takes us to the creation story in Judeo-Christian tradition in Genesis. There's a notion that Adam is getting put to sleep. In the English versions, Adam goes into a deep sleep because he's going to have this ribectomy to create a partner. But in the original Aramaic, the term used is tardema, which in modern Hebrew refers to anesthetic, but it does not, in the old meaning of it is not sleep. It's much more of a transformation, dreamy transformation of consciousness. More accurate to say, Adam goes into a deep dream, a deep dream. The reason I mention this is that nowhere in the remainder of Genesis or the Old Testament does God ever wake Adam up. And this is a very common notion across sacred traditions, that life is but a dream, that life itself is but a dream. So imagine having a palpable sense of that, not just as an intellectual notion or a spiritual concept, but having a feeling, the same feeling you have when you suddenly realize that this nightmare, that this bad experience you're having is a nightmare, that it's a dream that you're having in bed, meaning you know you're going to wake up. You know, there are lots and lots of nightmares here on planet Earth, and we'll encounter them in our personal lives, and we encounter them around the world. So imagine what it would be like if you lived with the sense that this waking was actually a dream. Then you would live with a sense of a pending awakening. Okay, I just have a couple of slides here. My books did not show up in the boutique, so I just wanted to share a couple of them with you. This is my first book, Healing Night. And there are, in addition to lots of chapters on sleep, including the sociocultural context of sleep, there's a chapter on dreaming, and there's a chapter on the waking dream. These are two of a number of my audio books. The Yoga of Sleep, I think, is the one that's been most popular in these kinds of centers. I'm not sure why. And then a more sort of middle of the road, but a very good work I did with Dr. Andrew Weil called Healthy Sleep. And then lastly, my newest book is called Hush. I don't think you can read the small print. It's a book of bedtime contemplations, and this is a nightly reader. I wrote this book because I got the sense that so many people who were struggling with sleep and dream issues came to believe that they had to be experts, that they had to read these long texts on sleep and dreams before they could get back to sleep and dreams. And so I tried to distill 100 of a sort of very basic, both scientific and spiritual principles that are little nightly readers that help guide you back to sleep. So, and tomorrow in the workshop, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time looking at how to deal with dark issues in dreams, shadow issues, and also looking at how to promote dreams. And then we'll take a look at various perspectives on dream analysis or dream interpretation. Thank you.